Hello everybody, welcome to another tutorial on this channel. Today we will discuss about API. We will learn what it is, how it works, how we can use it, what it needs to in order to make it work, and stuff like that. We will split the session into parts. The first part will be theory about API, what it means, and so on. And in the second part, I will go over how we can send some requests and so on. We will be focusing on REST API. So if you want to jump directly to the practical part, you can just skip the first part of the video. You have the timeline down and you will see whenever the practical part starts. So yeah, let's get it started. Alright, so let's first start with explaining what an API is, and after that we will go over and we will use this with Python so that you will see how in a practical way how you can use it. So first we will go over what is an API. So an API is basically an application programming interface. That's what API stands for. Which defines the rules that you must follow to communicate with other software systems. So developers expose or create APIs so that other applications can communicate with their application programmatically. For example, the timesheet, right, application, which a lot of companies uses, exposes an API that asks for an employee's full name and a range of data. When it receives this information, it is internally processes the employee's timesheet and returns the numbers of hours worked in that range. This is how it actually works, right? So we have the web application in browser, as I called it, which is sending a request to the internet. API is getting to the web server. It's actually processing the data and is taking everything that was requested from the database, and then it returns from using the same tools like the internet to send the response back to the app. Now we will go over what is a REST API, right? Because that's what I want to focus on today. So the REST is actually a representational state transfer. And is a software architecture actually that imposes conditions on how an API should work. REST was initially created as a guideline to manage communication on a complex network like the internet. You can use REST-based architecture to support high-performing and reliable communication at scale. And you can easily implement and modify it, bringing visibility and cross-platform portability to any API system. Now, this is a very simple chart, I would say, design that shows how this RESTful API work. But let me show you exactly step by step how this works. We have the basic function here of a RESTful API, which is basically the same as parsing the internet, right? Because as you can see here, the client contacts the server by using an API when it requires a resource. API developers explain how the client should use the REST API in the server application in the API documentation. And this is basically how it works. So we have the client first, right, which is sending the request to the server. The client follows the API documentation to format the request in a way that the server understands. The server authenticates the client and confirms that the client has the right to make that request. And then also the server receives the request and processes it internally. The server returns a response to the client, and then the response is containing information that tells the client whether the request was successful. One more thing about the response is that it also includes any information that a client requested. So the REST API request and response details vary slightly depending on how the API developers designed the API. All right, going further, we have the request, right? And what the request should actually contain. Because RESTful APIs require requests to contain the following main components, sorry. Which is first, it is the unique resource identifier, right? Which the server identifies each resource with unique resource identifiers. Then there is the method. Well, developers often implement RESTful APIs by using the hypertext transfer protocol. And then the HTTP headers, which requests headers are the metadata exchange between the client and the server. And we will basically go over each one of them a little bit more in details to see what this actually means. So we have the URI, which is the server identifies each resource with unique resource identifiers, I said, right? For the REST services, the server typically performs resource identifications by using the uniform resource locator, which is the URL that everyone knows, and the URL specifies the path to the resource, right? An URL is similar to the website address that you enter in your browser to visit any web page. So the URL is also called the request endpoint and clearly specifies to the server what the client requests. So we have here an URL, which is, I try to split it between the things that we have so that you understand how this works, right? So we have the HTTP, which is the protocol, the host, the port, which is normal, except the port, maybe you don't use the port usually, but then from here it starts to get into the API thing, right? Which is the application context here, and then we have the version of the API, and then we have the resource, right? In our case here is users, and then we have the parameters. So this is how an URL is actually created. It can vary, but this is a basic and default one. Now, regarding the methods that we use, so developers often implement RESTful APIs using the HTTP, I said. An HTTP method tells the server what it needs to do to the resource, right? And here are the most common HTTP methods. We have GET, which client users get to access resources that are located at a specified URL on the server. They can cache, get, request, and send parameters in the RESTful API request to instruct the server to filter data before sending it, right? We will see a practical way for this as well later on this video. We have POST, which clients uses POST to send data to the server, right? They include the data representation with the request. Sending the same POST request multiple times has the side effect of creating the same resource multiple times. And then there is the PUT. Clients uses PUT to update existing resource on the server. Unlike POST, sending the same PUT request multiple times in a RESTful web service gives the same result. And then the last one that I will mention is delete, which clients uses to request delete request to remove the resource. And delete request can change the server state. However, if the user does not have appropriate authentication, the request will fail. And I've created a small table here, which is giving a very short details about what each method is doing, so that it will be a little bit more helpful. All right, and then the last one, which is the headers, which are the headers, right? So the headers are the metadata exchange, I said, between the client and the server. For instance, the request header indicates the format of the request, and the response provides the information about the request status, and so on, right? And we have here first the data, right? Requests might include data for POST, PUT, and other HTTP methods to work successfully. The second header are the parameters. So the parameters can include parameters that gives the server more details about what needs to be done. And here are some of the parameters, some different type of parameters. So you have the path parameter that specify the URL details. We have the query parameters that request more information about the resource, and cookie parameters that authenticate clients quickly. And here are some common headers in a REST API, which is content type. This header specifies the format of the request or response body, such as application JSON for JSON data, or application XML for XML data. Here is an example where it says content minus type. It's application/JSON. There's this accept. This header specifies the format of the data that the client is willing to receive in the response, such as application JSON, that's the same thing, or application XML for the XML file is similar to the content type. This header specifies the format of the data that the client is willing to receive in the response. For example, the following header specifies that the client will accept a response in either JSON or XML format. And it says accept, and also contains application that /JSON, and also separated by comma application /XML, right? And then is the authorization, and this header is used to provide authentication credentials such as an API key or a token. The specific format of the credentials will depend on the authentication schema that is being used. This header is used to provide authentication credentials. For example, the following header uses the basic authentication schema to provide a user and password. And it is authentication basic, and then it's this key that you have to pass, right? That's about the authentication methods, because we just mentioned in the last slide, right? So let's see. A RESTful web service must authenticate request before it can send the response. That's obvious, except the ones that does not have an authentication. So the authentication is the process of verifying an identity. For example, you can prove your identity by showing an ID card or driver license. Similarly, RESTful service clients must prove their identity to the server to establish trust. And RESTful API has 4 common authentication methods. Let's start with the first one, which is the HTTP authentication. HTTP defines some authentication schemes that you can use directly when you are implementing the REST API. And the following are the 2 of these schemes. So we have first basic authentication, and in this one the client sends the username and password in the request header. It encodes them with base 64, which is an encoding technique that converts the pair into a set of 64 characters for safe transmission. And then it's bearer authentication. The term bearer authentication refers to the process of giving access control to the token bearer. The bearer token is typically an encrypted string of characters that the server generates in response to a login request, for example. And the client sends the token in the request header to access the resources. And then we have the second one, we have the API key. API keys are another option for REST API authentication. In this approach, the server assigns a unique generated value to a first-time client. Whenever the client tries to access resources, it uses the unique API key to verify itself. And the API key are less secure because the client has to transmit the key, which makes it vulnerable to the network theft. And then there is the authenticate, which it combines passwords and tokens for highly secure login access to any system. The server first requests a password and then asks for an additional token to complete the authorization process. And it can check the token at any time and also over time, which a specific scope and longevity. All right, and let's go over the final thing that I have here in terms of theory. And it is about what does the RESTful API server response contains. Because the REST principles requires the server response to contain the following main components. And the first is the status line, right? The status line contains a 3-digit status code that communicates request success or failure. For instance, 2XX codes indicate success, but 4XX and 5XX codes indicates error. A 3 followed by something codes indicate the URL redirection. The following are some common status codes that you will encounter. The first one is 200, which is generic success response. 201, it's post method success response. 400 is incorrect request that server cannot process. 404 is very common, right? Because it's a resource not found. And then apart the status line, we have the message body. The response body contains the resource representation. The server selects an appropriate representation format based on what the request headers contains. Clients can request information in XML or JSON formats, which defines how the data is written in plain text. For example, if the client requests the name and age for a person named John, the server returns a JSON representation as follows. And this is similar to what we have in Python called dictionaries. And this is why we can easily work with them, right? And then the headers, which are the response, also contains these headers or metadata about the response. They give more context about the response and includes information such as the server, encoding, date, and content type. And yeah, that's pretty much it in terms of theory. And now let's jump over and try to do this in a practical way using Python. All right, so for the practical way, I will be using this open weather map. More precisely, I will be using current weather data because it has a free plan as well. You would have to create an account here in order to be able to use their API. So feel free to do it if you want to use the same one. So I've already opened this by accessing their API documentation. And in here, in their API documentation, you will see that they will have in the first page how to make an API call. And this is an URL, right? And the URL is built, as I mentioned before. The first thing is obviously the protocol, and then it is the host. Right, and then we will see the application context, we will see the version, and after that we will be using the resource, right, which is the weather. And after the resource, you will have the parameters. And the parameters at this link are the latitudinal and longitudinal coordinates, I'm assuming, and the app ID, which is the API key. But here at the parameters, if we take a look, so it has latitude and longitude. It has the app ID, which are required. As you can see, both of them are required. And then is this one, which is optional, which is mode, response format, possible value are XML and HTML. And if you don't use the mode, so if you don't call up what is your preference between those, you will get a JSON. A JSON is basically a JavaScript object notation, which is by default in this case. There is also units, which you can use the standard, metric, imperial, different units you can choose. And there is the lang. You can use this parameter to get the output in your language. So yeah, that's the thing. And here is an example, right? It passes the latitudinal and longitudinal. But we won't use this because we want to get the weather by the name of the city. I think it's easier. So if we take a look over here, you will see that we will also have built-in API request by city name. And we have here also the same thing, how to call it, different parameters, and some examples at the bottom. So we will go with the first one, which is an URL as well, which I will copy in a new tab. And in here I have to modify this city name, which is, let's say, London. And then I have to call an API. So for the API, I have to go into my account, my API keys, and in here I have this API key, which I will copy and paste it here, and voila, we get the data, right? Let's try to insert a random key here to see if it works. It won't, right? It's an 401 request, status code, and the message saying that the invalid API key. I will go back to the previous one. So right now we basically have this JSON file. This is basically like the in Python we have dictionaries. Let's go with JSON reader so that we can see it in a better way. Right, let me expand everything, and this is a simple way to make the file looks more readable. So we have all the data here. We have the coordinates, we have the weather, we have the main, which is basically the temperature, feels like, mean, max, pressure, humidity. We have visibility, wind, clouds, some system, I don't know what that means, time zone, and so on. And the code, which is definitely 200 because it is successfully sent. Okay, so now that we have this data, we have to process it, right? We have to do something with it. Let's say I just want to get the whatever is in main, or I just want to get the coordinates and the temperature and everything. So in order to do that, we will have to make this request through Python, and after that, play with the data that we receive in order to have displayed whatever we want to have. So for this, we will go into the PyCharm. We have to import requests first because this is a module that helps you do requests. Let's define here get weather data. Let's pass the city as an argument. Let's create an variable that where we store the API keys. Let's call an argument where we store the link. So let's first go and store this link right here. Right here. But then if I want to store the API key differently, I don't need this. I will store it here, and then I will pass here the variable. Same goes with the city because we already requested right here when we call the function, so it's not needed. And after that, let's call this data equal to request that get, and then pass the URL. And now let's print the response. Let's print the request. The data dot status code. And this one will gives us the status code. But before that, let me quickly do the main function right here. City equal to, let's put an input here where we call the user to insert the city name, and then let's call this function get weather data using the variable that we just requested from the user. Let's start the script. It says city, I will pass London, and then I will get 200 as a status code, which is successfully sent. That means it works. Now, in order to get the data from this request, we will have to tell him that we want the JSON, right? If I print now the data, you will see that we will basically get whatever we got here as well. Let me quickly run this. Let me put this London again here. And as you can see, we get the coordinates, longitudinal, latitudinal, weather, ID, main, clouds, and so on, which is exactly the same thing that we have right here. So this way we basically got the data inside our script. Now we have to play with it. So in order to play with it, we have to look at this reader, which makes our life easier. Let's see, I want to get the longitudinal and latitudinal. Let's get the coordinates. So the lon equal to something, equal to something. We get this. In order to get this, we have to go into coordinates, which is coord only. So let's go data coord, and I think it was lon. And the same thing goes for the second one. which is chord, but in here we go with latitudinal, right? Yes, that's right. Let's also get the temperature, or at least yeah, temperature and feels like. Let's get those as well. So it's temperature, which is data main, and I think it was temp. Am I remember right? Yeah. And then the feels like it's equal to data main and feels like. Right. What else we can get? Let's also get the name we have, the time zone, I think. I think, yeah, let's get the visibility because it looks a little bit different. So let's also get a visibility, which is equal to data and directly visibility, because if you can see the it's not inside the main, right? So it's outside the main, so it should we should only call directly data and visibility. Now let's create a cool print statement right here, and let's say the data for, and let's put here the name of the city like this. Coordinates are, and let's call the longitudinal comma this one. Oops. After that, let's say the temperature. I think I spelled this wrong. Is temp, but it feels like with a visibility of visibility, something like this. Let's call it like that. So let's go with Paris. And as you can see, the data for Paris coordinates are those. The temperature is this one, but it feels like this one with the visibility of this. So yeah, basically we got only what we needed from the whole data that the server returned, right? And we could use different let me go back a little bit. We use different parameters, or at least we can use different parameters. We can get the units, for example, the mode to be an XML or anything else. So you can play with this. You can play with this and see what is best for your case, for your use. But yeah, I think we are enough with the GET request for today. Let me know down in the comments if you want to see some examples with the post, put, or delete request, and we can probably use one of those, or at least all of them, or maybe all of them in a single video in the next video. So yeah, that's pretty much for today. All right, so I almost forgot the fact that there might be the possibility of a user to insert a wrong city name. So let's see what happens if someone is inserting a random name that does not exist. We will get an error, which is key error. So in order to make sure we don't encounter this, we can use try except, where we use try and except here with a key error as E, and we can print something to let the client, I mean the user, know that he inserted the wrong city name by telling him, hey, unfortunately this the city that you inserted, and let's tell the city couldn't is not found. Let's go with is not found, something like this. And if I press this again and try to insert a random city, it will say unfortunately the city that you inserted and the city is not found. So this is how you basically make sure you don't get an error in the code whenever someone is having an passing a wrong city name. yeah, so that's pretty much it. So thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you liked it. If you learned something today, please leave a like, drop a comment down below in the comment section, and let me know if there is anything else you'd like to see in the next videos. Till then, don't forget to practice, and let me know if you have any question or any issue while you are trying to play with APIs. See ya.